Yes, I am mute. So we're covering fasting. We're talking about fasting as abstaining from food, but it's really an act of the will. It's the interior disposition to put God first above material goods. I'm sorry for those that were watching that you missed that first part. So prayer is intertwined with exorcism, spiritual warfare, and with prayer. If you notice, the apostles fasted after Christ's ascension. They weren't fasting just because we're sad Jesus is gone, so let's have a pity party and we'll forget to eat. I was taught that the only type of New Testament fasting that was real was when you were really intently concentrating on God and you just forgot to eat. That probably is a type of fast, but that does not involve an act of will. We see in the New Testament that even after Christ ascended, so the disciples were assured of his resurrection, they're not sad about him being dead, they practice fasting, and they do so before they make important decisions. St. Paul, right? He's the libertine. You can do what you want in Christ. You have perfect liberty because living under grace and not the law, except he taught abstinence and celibacy. We also see that he took a Nazirite vow. So fasting is all throughout the New Testament. Nowhere do we see it ending. Christ said that he came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. So you need to be real careful about jumping on the bandwagon of saying, well, that's Old Testament, doesn't apply to us. I would say the Old Testament does apply to us, but we understand it through the lens of Christ. So, all right, the purposes of fasting is not to look like this guy. This is some sort of, I believe it's Buddhist, I could be getting that wrong, saint or demigod that's fasted himself so bad that you can see his spine. You're not fasting to make yourself a better person in the sense that you're going to lose weight or finally kick cigarettes or whatever. If you do those things, those are fine. But those are just bonuses. The purpose of the fast is to direct the will towards God. So, without further ado, the first purpose of fasting is discipline. See all our soldiers lined up here. Discipline's hard, especially in our day and age, because we're taught to indulge ourselves at every moment. We've got a cell phone. I don't ever have to be bored. I can whip this out. You may have seen me looking at my cell phone right before class. I was bored. I pulled it out and looked at my cell phone for a minute. So we do have a lack of discipline in the modern world. Fasting will remind you of what you value. Because when you give something up, you may say, well, it's easy for me to give up chocolate. Or it's easy for me to give up this thing. But when you do it, you'll begin to realize what's important to you. Do you think about that thing all the time? Do you focus on it? Do you can't wait for the fast to be over so that you can go back to it? And really what fasting should do is start to remind you, what are you clinging to? What are you attached to? Or, like, I love coffee. And one year I gave up coffee. It was rough. And I realized, wow, coffee is really important to me. There's other things I've done that too. You may have given up something and you may not think you have that strong of an attachment to it, but then you realize you do. And the reason for this discipline is to draw closer to Christ. What this should end up doing is you're like, wow, coffee is really important to me. Is Jesus this important to me? Do I get this irritated throughout the day if I forget to say my prayers in the morning? Probably not. I'm probably a nicer person if I forget to pray and drink coffee. That's a problem. So really, when you fast, you're reminding yourself of what's important, because you may discover that cheese is important to you, or your television show is important to you. And that should make you stop and think, wait a minute, is Jesus as important to me as these things I've given up? Since we are made of body and soul, which is matter and spirit, what we do with one affects the other. We are not Gnostics. A lot of times Gnostics engaged in very rigorous fasting because they believed the body was evil. They looked like our Buddhist saint who was killing himself. There's a heresy in the Middle Ages, the Albigensian heresy in southern France, and they were basically Gnostics there, and the priests of the sect would starve themselves to death because they believed the body was evil. And it was considered almost like a badge of honor to die from self-starvation. That's not Christian at all. That's heresy. But what we do with our material body does affect the spirit and vice versa. So if you have no control over your body, you say, well, I cannot help myself. I have to smoke. I have to have my cup of coffee or whatever. But I'm still a good Christian. I still, pray and all that. I would wager that if you have a problem controlling yourself, your physical appetites, you probably also have a hard time at some part of your spiritual life. Because if you're undisciplined in your everyday material life, you're going to be undisciplined somewhere else. So the point of disciplining the body is to also discipline the spirit at the same time. They should go together. Remember that it's the interior act of the will that gives meaning to the fast. So outward fast should lead to an interior act of the will. Discipline and fasting will help instill discipline in other areas of our life, just as in prayer or doing charitable works. So we need to be careful with discipline, and we're going to talk about this later when we get towards the end. Discipline is good, but remember the goal is Christ. You can be so obsessed with discipline that if you break your fast at all, you beat yourself up all day long. And I've done that before. So discipline is good, it's right. It should lead to union with Christ. If you're more concerned about your discipline than you are with Christ, that's also a problem. All right. So another thing that fasting does for us is it should be entwined with the prayer rule and recollection. So does anyone remember kind of like what the prayer rule thing was from last class? I'm going to give a breakdown on what I mean by, if I say, what is your prayer rule, what would you say to me? Okay. Your prayer rule is how you pray, basically. And I said most people's prayer rule is I pray before I eat and I pray when I get in trouble. That's their prayer rule. You can have a prayer rule. We'll say I say my morning offices, my evening offices, and I do the Angelus in the middle of the day. That's a prayer rule. So when we're talking about prayer rule, it's just a pattern of prayer that you set for yourself. So fasting should sort of involve your prayer rule, and it should involve an act of recollection. Recollection is remembering God, making God present in your day-to-day life. So, fasting should form a part of the holistic spiritual life. By holistic, we mean whole. It all fits together. I like to think of the Catholic faith as a holistic way of theology. If you pull one part out, it's like a Jenga tower, right? The tower starts to shift and tumble. You can't say, well, this isn't necessary. I don't need this part. I can get rid of this part. Because basically what's happened in our modern age, we've boiled down Christianity to what I call the bare essentials. How do you know if you died tonight, you would go to heaven? What's your assurance of salvation? So you have a stock answer, well, I put my trust in Jesus. That's right. That's true. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do these other things. You shouldn't fast, or you shouldn't pray, or you shouldn't attend church. So fasting should be part of a whole effect during Lent. It should involve your prayer life, your life of doing charitable works. So that's why I say fasting is part of the holistic spiritual life. Really, the ascetic life is simply the Christian life. It's discipline in all parts of your life. All right, so by fasting from temporal goods, we make room for spiritual discipline. Sometimes this can be quite literal. If you always watch a movie every evening, when you get home from work, so that's the way you relax, and you watch a 2-hour movie, and then you take a shower and go to bed. Well, if you fast from that movie, you've got 2 hours to do something else. You could say your prayer office, you could read your scriptures, you could spend time with your family actually talking to them. So in a very literal way, fasting can give you more time for spiritual discipline. But I would also say that by fasting, remember, we're reminding ourselves by fasting of what's most important. So when we begin to realize that we've placed pleasures of the body above spiritual pleasures, we should start to right that order and start to bring it back into a balance, into a holistic balance. The very act of fasting should bring to mind, recollection, the reason why we fast, which is Christ. So a simple way to do this is that if you go through your day and you're craving a cigarette or you're craving a cup of coffee, remember why the reason you're craving it is because you fasted and you're fasting for Christ. So fasting should be a constant reminder of Christ. I'm giving up this thing because I want to remember Christ and dwell on Him. You could even make that part of a rule. Like whenever I feel a craving for chocolate, I am going to say the Lord's Prayer or something like that. But it should bring to mind a constant recollection, because what we're trying to cultivate is an attitude that as you walk throughout your life, every day, every moment, you're remembering Christ. And that's hard to do. But if you've got this gnawing pain in your stomach, that'll remind you, I'm hungry. I'm hungry because I'm fasting. I'm fasting because I want to be closer to Christ. And another very practical way that fasting helps us in our spiritual life, it gives us empathy with others who may suffer. And it could lead us, hopefully, to value our material goods less, which should inspire almsgiving or charitable works. There's people starving to death today. Some of them may be charlatans, but you can drive downtown Greenville and see people begging for food, money, we think that we're poor, and I'm poor. But when I went to the Philippines and saw people living in chicken houses, I was like, I'm not doing too bad. Fasting can lead to empathy with others who suffer. And the world suffers, by the way. I don't know how many of y'all have been to third world countries, traveled, visited? Yeah. We are really richly blessed in the Western world, and that's Western Europe, the United States, and Canada. And, there's a lot of people who do not have it as well as we do. Subduing the passions. And here we have our man who's really upset. So passions, let's talk about what are the passions. That sounds like a fancy word that people throw around. But really, I'm going back to the church fathers here. The passions, or what happens when our bodily appetites gain the mastery over our rational intellect. And what do I mean by that? Bodily appetites aren't bad, right? We all get hungry. We all need sleep. We all need to drink. We all feel a need to have a mate and a partner and different things. But what the fathers would say is that in Adam's fall, the human nature was broken to an extent where those things, which are secondary, our appetites, gained the upper hand and were controlling us. So that now we're obsessed with getting food, safety, shelter, a partner, reproducing. And those things overwhelm us in our own imminent death, overwhelm us to the point where they control what we do with our life. I always hear people say, you may have heard this ridiculous saying, all wars are fought over religion. That's baloney. All wars are fought about money and power, because that's all people want after the fall is money and power and security. So that's what happens. One of the consequences of the fall is that those appetites to keep us safe and healthy and happy gain the upper hand over our mind and our spirit. This leads to things like gluttony, lust, greed, anger, and jealousy. Hunger is real, and feeding yourself is good. But if feeding yourself is good, then feeding yourself more and more and more and more, it has to be better, right? No, that's gluttony. We should practice temperance. If having children and having a partner is great, and God gave us sexual appetites for a reason, then why can't I have 7 wives or 100 and 1,000 kids? Just make my own nation for myself. But no, that's the problem. Remember, the appetites of our passions have gained the other hand, where we don't keep those things in balance. We're not satisfied with a cup of cold water and a piece of bread. We want steak and a glass of wine. There's nothing wrong with that either, but we keep wanting more and more. In the modern West, we are trained, like I talked about, to be entertained at every moment of our lives. With no room for boredom, we never learn to cultivate stillness and to practice being present in the moment. This is what I struggle with. Just try turning off your cell phone, like turning it off. Think about leaving your house without your cell phone. That's a disaster. I've got to turn around. I'm going to be late to work. Doesn't matter. Have to have the cell phone. And there may be important reasons for that. Maybe some of your business revolves around you being on a cell phone, but it could also be that you just want to play the latest game or have the neatest app that tells you all the trivia questions that you can stump your coworkers with. And I see this, I teach, I'm at a middle school now. It's an afternoon part-time job. I keep kids whose parents can't come pick them up. These are middle school kids. They had their face in a screen 99% of the time. They're sitting in my class. They're not doing homework. They're watching random YouTube videos or music or pop stars. And so from a young age, we are training our young people. You cannot be bored. You have to be entertained all the time. And sometimes I tell my daughter, my 4-year-old daughter, be like, Daddy, I'm so bored. At 4 years old, she's already doing this. And sometimes I'm like, I guess you have to be bored. It's not terrible. So really, by fasting, we should be recognizing some of these passions. They're like snakes, right? They're in the bushes. And then when you rustle the bushes, that snake pops out and you chop its head off with a hoe. So the fast is rustling that bush. And when that snake of hunger, or I don't want to be bored, or I want to watch my movie, pops its head out, you see it. That's when you chop its head off with a hoe. So by fasting, we're learning to control those things and to calm ourselves down. This should lead us to overcoming these appetites, or at least attempting to being present in the moment and calming the body and spirit. The reason we do this is not just to be calm. Remember, union with God is the point of all this. We're being calm to let the Holy Spirit work in us. So does anyone want to share a story about, I'm curious, has anyone tried this, like just putting the cell phone down for a day, doing a media fast? Is it hard? Does it bother you? Yeah, okay. I did a social media fast one year, and man, it made me realize how much time I spend on social media. You don't think you do that very much until you take a fast from it, and you realize, I do this all the time. Okay. Hierarchy of goods. So I stole this phrase, sort of. It's my own terminology. Who knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah. So I'm not saying that Maslow has the right idea or that you should go and find that and be inspired by his theory, because I think he's probably got a lot of problems with it. But I stole the term sort of from Maslow, who he posited that you've got bottom needs down here, which are baseline things. Then as you go up, they become more and more spiritual. And my problem with that is that he would say that if you're not happy and healthy and well-fed, then you can't succeed in these other things that are more important. And I would say that we're human beings. We need to learn to set those happy and healthy things to the side and focus on God. And this is inspired a little bit by St. Augustine. So when I mean the hierarchy of goods, I mean that God is at the top. God is the most important thing. And all things in this world are good. People are actually right when they say, I believe people are basically good. That's true. But what they forget sometimes to tell you is that people are also very broken. But everything is good as God made it. But they derive their goodness from God. Nothing is good in itself. And we can love creatures and creaturely comforts if we understand that we love God in them. So I would say this is a struggle for me because I love my daughter. And sometimes I'm like, wow, I love her a lot. I have to realize that God gave her to me. And that if he wants to call her home or something, that's his. I'll never forget Father Paul. I was telling a story about Ariana wanting to talk to Jesus or something. And Father Paul said, well, of course, that's his little girl. He meant that's Jesus' little girl. And that really struck home with me. It made me realize that although she's my daughter, really she's God's creature first. So fasting should make you realize those things that you value by themselves are not great. They have value because they come from God, because God gave them to us. And therefore, we have to understand that we can put all those things to the side. Fasting is about putting things to the side for union with God. So that's why if you are obsessed with even something like I would say even the prayer book, if you say your office is all the time, which is good and great, but actually just obsessed with the physical act of saying the offices, and it really doesn't have anything to do with God. That's wrong. You can make an idol out of anything. Really, when I say hierarchy of goods, we want to reorder ourselves so that God is at the top and everything derives from God, and that we aim for God. This should also make us realize that we're not Gnostic, but there are spiritual needs that are above bodily needs. Fasting is generally about controlling bodily needs to discipline the spirit, because the spirit allows a greater participation in God, who is spirit. Okay. Does anyone have a question about hierarchy of goods or anything I said right there? Comments? Okay. All right, types of fasting. And these are basically my suggestions, but a lot of these are traditional in the church as well. So obviously you can fast from food, and generally that's certain types of food. I used to think fasting was complete abstaining from food, and I'm like, I would die. And you will if you go for too long. But really, what the church has generally done is abstaining from meat. Some people will abstain from certain type, sugar, chocolate, coffee. Alcohol is traditional as well. Tobacco is another common thing to fast from. Marital relations is a common type of fast. And the important part about that is that it has to be mutually agreed to. You should talk to your spouse about this if you're considering a type of fast involving that. Modernity, this is, I think, a big one for us, of course, is all our screens, our social media. And types of fasting, mutual pacts that can involve marital relations, or you can make a pact with your friends. Say you always go out with your coworker, smoke a cigarette, have a cup of coffee first thing in the morning when you get to work. Well, maybe you make a pact, maybe your friend's Catholic or Anglican or whatever, and you say, listen, why don't we give up that cup of coffee and cigarette? We just go out and talk. And that is actually can be good because it can lead to a little bit of accountability. And you can discuss things. So fasting, you shouldn't brag about your fast to other people, like, I'm giving up da-da-da-da. But if you have a partner or in your family or a friend, I think it can be beneficial to make mutual pacts. Okay, particular fasts. 3 of these are right out of the prayer book. So Anglican Church in our prayer book mandates a total fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And I'm just going to let you know, I think I've been successful at this once. I haven't been in Anglican that long, but 4 years, I think one of these days I went the entire day without, I think I may have had a glass of water in the morning. So that's the goal, right? But realistically, I've got to take my daughter to school. I have got to go to work. I've got to drive my daughter around. If I don't eat all day long, I'm going to pull somebody's head off, and that's not good either. So generally, you do what you can. Fast. If you can't fast totally, then fast from a certain thing, or fast for part of the day. Sometimes people will eat like 2 snacks and a small meal, or something like that. The Ember Days, 4 times a year each season. This is actually a fast time of the church. And Fridays, actually every Friday is supposed to be a fast day. Now those are not total fasts. Generally, you fast from something on the Ember Days and Friday, and you, especially here, fish on Fridays. Fish Fridays used to be a big deal. That tradition, having a fish fry on Friday. But those are the 3 times that the prayer book actually mandates a fast. It's total fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, a partial fast on the Ember Days and Fridays. And the last one is very traditional that a lot of Anglicans practice, and a lot of Christians practice, is you fast before the Eucharist. And this can vary. Some people are really hardcore and they don't fast from the sun goes down on Saturday till they partake of the Eucharist the next morning. I believe the Roman Catholic Church in the West says you need to fast an hour before you partake of the Eucharist. Anglican Church doesn't mandate any of that. You can come in drinking your Starbucks coffee, and I think Father Paul will commune you. But it is a pious and good practice to prepare yourself to receive the Lord's body and blood that way. And that's another thing we need to get on is in fasting that there is a tendency to be a hypocrite, to be judgmental. So if you fast from sundown on Saturday till you receive the Eucharist at 11:45 on Sunday, and you're wonderful, and you see your brother pulling out of McDonald's loaded down with coffee cups and biscuits, and he's coming to the Eucharist too, don't judge your brother. The Lord will convict him if he needs to be convicted. All right, so that leads us to the knife's edge. And I call this the knife's edge because if you fall off one way, you make an error on one side. If you fall off the other way, you make an error on the other side. Father Paul has talked about this a little bit in communion. In the Western church especially, there's such a fear of receiving communion unworthily that for hundreds of years, the lay people barely receive communion at all. It's like, well, if you can't receive it worthily and no one is worthy of communion, we better not take it. Well, that was wrong. So let's be careful falling off one side or the other. So I have my golden means, the knife's edge. So on the one hand, fasting can lead to being very much a rigorist. I have to keep this fast, and if I don't keep it perfectly, then I'm a terrible sinner. Well, no, you need to be a little flexible. But on the other hand, you can say, well, why fast at all? I mean, I fail every day at my fast, so I'm not going to do anything. The fast is something you're trying to do. You will probably fail at it. Most people will tell you if you're doing a good fast, you're going to fail some of the time. Get back on your knife's edge and keep walking. Fasting could lead you to being judgmental. You're picking on that guy with the cup of coffee and the biscuit walking into church. So the guy walking in with the biscuit and the cup of coffee goes, man, I can't fast at all, so I'm not even going to try. Once again, that's the knife's edge. The guy who's always judgmental because he fasts perfectly. The guy who says, it's just too hard, why bother, I'd be a hypocrite, I'm not going to fast at all. You can be a Pharisee by being judgmental. That's bad, that's being a hypocrite. On the other hand, if you don't ever fast at all, you can be like, well, I'm living by grace, not by law, so I'll just do what I want. I won't bother to fast at all. You can get to the point where you can't make a mistake without punishing yourself viciously. You beat yourself up. Father Paul would tell me that I have this problem. I am super scrupulous, so I will break one little rule that I made and just agonize over it. That's actually bad in and of itself. On the other hand, I could just be like, well, I'm never going to correct my mistakes. I'm always going to make them, so why bother? I would also say that if keeping the fast leads to anger or depression, you make someone's life miserable, I would rather you not fast. But you can fall into the other camp. Fasting makes me angry, so I'm not even going to try. So really, it's about finding something you can do and being willing to fail at it, but after failing, to continue to try. So those are just some pitfalls on both sides of the knife's edge. Questions or comments on fasting? You want to share any stories? Yes?
When I was in high school, I had a Roman Catholic history teacher that got into a discussion with a Roman Catholic student in
Okay.
class as to why fish became the accepted food to eat on Fridays.
Okay.
And one of them, I don't remember which one, it was a long time ago,
Okay.
said it was because the Pope was trying to encourage the business of the fishermen. I was wondering about that. But do you have any history about why certain foods have been selected, especially having an association with the Russian Orthodox Church for a while, through a daughter-in-law?
Uh-huh.
I know that they don't eat oil, and when
Right.
my grandson comes for a visit, I have to really make sure that he's not fasting, and I haven't included any of those things.
Right. Well, I don't know if the Pope did that to increase fishing. I have no idea. It's possible. I would say all those things are actually what I would call church disciplines. None of them are like dogmas. So if you look, the Eastern Orthodox Church has a slightly different fast than the Western Church does.
They fast a lot.
They fast a lot more than we do. Well, and I would also say, look at the New Testament. I mean, God tells his people certain foods not to eat. And I would say it's always been human nature to pick on certain foods. Muslims don't eat pork. Some people consider certain types of animals unclean. And I think, I don't know the reason for all that. I don't know why God picked pig meat as why the Jews couldn't eat it. But I would say probably it had to do with reminding yourself that something's more important than bacon. And God picked something, right?
They tend to be proteins and carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Tends to be things that have to do with muscle, things that have to do with energy.
And,
So the fast actually slows you down,
Yeah.
and makes you weaker, for lack of a better word, so that when Easter comes, your strength returns with the resurrection.
I would also say, going on top of that I personally feel it might have to do with something to do with killing. You kill an animal to consume it. Some early Christians became vegetarians, and some of them took that too far, but that was a practice because they're like, Christ was the final sacrifice. We sacrificed lambs and ate that flesh. We no longer need to do that, so they became vegetarians. So maybe killing is involved with eating meat products as well. Does anyone else have anything for us? All right. Yes. Yes.
So during the main Sundays are the many Easters.
Right.
I backful, so if I do fast from Sunday,
Right.
I backful, if I, okay, let's say I gave up chocolate.
Right.
So today I go and have a piece of chocolate.
Yeah.
I'm doomed for the rest of the
Right. So there's the right. So Sunday is a mini Easter. So a lot of people will say, "Well, I don't have to fast on those days," and that's right. Some people, and I found myself in this camp, if I've given something up, but I wait for every Sunday to do that thing, I'm sort of undermining my fast. Leave it to your personal discretion. If you can pick up the thing on Sunday and not let it bother you, and break your fast on Sunday, great. I would err on the side of not doing that thing on Sunday, because I know me, I will just wait all Sunday to smoke my pipe or to have that cup of coffee, and it really is not actually helping me. But yeah, you can break your fast on Sunday, but that's at your discretion. So, yes?
It really is kind of what you're saying, a personal thing.
Yes, very much so.
People that like Emma don't like fish,
Right.
so they go, ew, I'm not eating fish. Whereas if you go down and get fish chips, and you all that nice crispy grease.
So I always find it ironic that we have a pancake supper to start Lent, because my Lenten meal sometimes is pancakes. There's no meat in there, right? So I got this huge stack of pancakes with butter and honey and toppings, and I'm like, man, I'm really suffering during Lent, So,
Just some ironies that tend to accompany Lent, and one of them is the Lenten recipe book, the Lenten cookbook.
yeah.
All these tasty recipes for Lent. Try this.
If
If what you're trying to do is to make all of your meals more attractive and more tasty, you're kind of missing the point.
If
And also, fish can be excellent.
yeah, if you live on the Gulf Coast and you have Low Country boil and you have fish fries, you're not suffering during Lent. So, anything else before we go? All right. Thank you so much. I will see you shortly.